The Strategy Inside Everything. I'm Adam Pierno. All right, welcome back to another episode of The Strategy Inside Everything. I am very excited today to talk to our guests about getting things, well, not wrong, but getting them imperfect and being okay with that and figuring out how to make the best of that and still do what you consider to be a great job, even when you know you don't have all the information you want. Joining me today is the strategy lead at Co-Collective, Jessica Lehmann Ash. Thank you very much for joining me.
Hi, Adam.
It's great to have you. We're on a little bit of we have a video patch with audio through the phone. So we're experimenting with new school and old school technology.
That's right. We're being imperfect in our technology system.
That's where we're bringing this topic to life in our solutions as exactly like we planned. Before we get up and running on our topic, would you like to give people a sense of your background? Just tell them a little bit about who you are and what you've done.
I am a Brit living in New York. I've been here for around 6 years, just over 6 years. And I came to New York straight from Shanghai, where I'd been for a year. And before that, I lived in London for a long time. And that might sound like a fortuitous and very international story. I actually grew up in Cambridge, UK, which isn't a million miles from London. It's just down the road in an American sense. And then went and studied music at King's College London and majored in composition. So I was writing kind of modern classical music, and I was thinking a lot about opera and the drama in opera because I'd grown up doing a lot of theatre and singing and musical theatre and that kind of stuff, being on stage a lot. And then I finished my music degree, and I thought that I wanted to be in the creative arts in some way, shape, or form. I was really inspired by arts education, and I went and did a master's in text and performance studies at RADA, joint with King's. It doesn't exist anymore in the same format, but it was a really amazing study course because it revolved around really getting to the nitty-gritty of what makes theatre, the theory behind theatre and drama and acting and voice and things. And I came to the end of that and was, sort of, okay, where do I take this next? And had dreams of being an opera director and wanted to find a route through and wasn't really sure on what that route would be, but instead decided, all right, well, I'll get a grounding in teaching. And I actually went and did Teach First, which it's a bit like Teach for America. I'd say it's less politically contentious in the UK. So I was teaching music for 2 years in a high school, senior school, high school in London. And it was pretty challenging. I always say that it was probably the most challenging job I've ever had, never will have, because teenagers are usually more difficult than clients. And I did that for 2 years. And then I went on from that, and I did a number of bits of work as a creative partnership coordinator. So I would work with schools and I'd help them identify ways in which they needed to change. And I would bring in creative practitioners to then devise special projects in order to help meet that need for change. So maybe it was a school in Harlow that needed a lot of work on literacy in their 11 and 12-year-olds. And how could we work with a filmmaker to actually help those children become better with their literacy and engage the parents in the process as well? And that's where I really track my history of being interested in strategy back to, because in a sense I was being an artistic strategist. I was helping schools with a strategy and how they could leverage creative partners and actually answer a problem that they were encountering. And so I did that for a while, and then I ended up having a bit of a career change where I realized that I was on the track of something I wanted to be able to do, which was use the two different sides of my brain, the left side and the right side. I really enjoyed the analytical elements of what I did, understanding problems and helping to solve them, but I really also enjoyed being really creative within that context. And saw this opportunity to actually use the skills in a different way in a more commercial environment, and ended up applying for the WPP fellowship, which I really never thought that I would get a place on because it's pretty competitive, and ended up with a place after 3 rounds of interviews. And that fall, I went to Rainy Kelly in London, did a year there as a client services person. I then went to Shanghai and worked at Ogilvy as a digital strategist when it was digital was already booming in China, but it was at the nascent days of WeChat, so it was pretty exciting. And when I look back on it now, I think it's fascinating to look at how far that ecosystem has come.
Oh yeah,
and how many eons ahead they are. And then I came to New York, and I was for a year at the Future Company, which is part of Kantar originally, and then went into brand strategy. And that has really been where I have found my home and developed my niche. And I spent a number of years at Brand Union, that became Super Union, and then went on to Fitch. And now find myself at Co Collective, doing a lot of the work that I really love, which is helping clients to solve really challenging, meaty business problems, and working with a lot of inspiring people to be able to do that.
How do you, so you, we're going to go way back to your music composition focus, because just hearing the narrative, I can connect music composition, not specifically opera, but if I remember, you play the piano. That kind of composition background of knowing I'm here and I need to get the person listening to this to feel this way by the end of this movement or piece. How do you relate musical composition to strategy, brand strategy, or not at all, and I'm an idiot?
That's a very interesting question that I've never been asked before. Usually it's more general around, music and how has that helped you in your career. But it's funny, when you're composing, you are both trying to feel the right way to the notes that you want to put on the page, that you want to bring to life, that you want to, are they going to create a feeling that you want people to feel when they hear it, or, to create the scene that you're trying to paint. But you're also using a kind of scientific process as well, right? It's an art and a science. You're not just throwing things down and seeing what sticks. And when you do that, you won't end up with a very good product. You end up with a good product when you're thinking methodically about the timbre of the different instruments that are going to be there. Am I writing for a wind quintet, or am I writing for piano and violin? How do they sound together? Which octaves and ranges? So you're being very specific about what you're using, why you're using those, but then you're also using your gut and your intuition and your instinct to feel into how that music should come to life and what it's going to express. So when I think about that in the context of strategy, I think there's a hugely there is something that ties those things together, where on the one hand you're looking for the right tools in your toolbox, like you mentioned toolbox earlier. You're looking for the right inputs that you need to use, whether that's pieces of data or insights around the landscape in which your client's brand exists, or consumer insight about how people are living or using different products right now. You're looking for what that can tell you. And that's the more kind of scientific piece of it. But then you're also sometimes going with gut and feel to how you bring those things together to build a coherent strategy that is compelling and inspiring. And when you're then building a narrative, perhaps, you're also feeling into that in a way that's telling a story to evoke a feeling in a room. So I think there are similarities.
And how does the role of composition play into the idea of imperfection? Because I could see it as, because there's not a verbal component always to musical composition, there's going to be gaps. A lot of it is I feel this way, I'm intending for you to feel that way, and we have to say, okay, that's close enough, or that's as much communication as we can get across to one another using this medium.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting way of thinking about imperfection in composition. That's right. I think one way I would talk about it is how sometimes you could compose something, and when you're playing it through on the piano, even if it's for a few different instruments, or when you're hearing it in your head, you would think, oh yeah, this bit, we should feel a crescendo and it should get really loud right here. And then, then we're going to get really quiet just afterwards. And then when it actually gets brought to life by the musicians, I had pieces composed once or twice in I had pieces performed a few times. And I remember one particular occasion where I'd specifically written it to have this quite intense dynamic difference at this one point, and the violinist and the pianist just completely reversed it. And it sounded great. And it made me think that, what I had intended wasn't actually how the music was going to sound best. So I, in that moment, didn't even know best about how the music should be put out into the world. So sometimes you need someone else to take a look at what you're doing, and to maybe, in this case, perform it, or to read it, or to discuss it with you, to then identify where you could make changes and make it better.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you tell someone a story that you don't intend to be funny, but they start cracking up. And it's sometimes those discoveries are like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about how ridiculous that whole thing is. That's a great result, is getting a different emotion than sometimes the one you intended, but sometimes not.
You're making me think about another relationship within strategy, and it's and music and that we're talking about here. And maybe it's less about imperfection, but you could say there's an element of that. So I really love Sol LeWitt, the artist, and the way that he talks about his art. You familiar with Sol LeWitt?
I'm not.
He was a modern artist, and his art is all around providing a sort of mathematical instruction that you would then go and bring to life on a wall. And it's very architectural and very, geometrically driven.
Okay.
And it's all around lines, certain length, and intersect. And the way that he would talk about it is that he was like a composer, and he was then giving it to a conductor and an orchestra to go and bring to life. So he no longer had full control over it. And, that reminds me of the same experience I had where I composed something, and when it got brought to life, it became more than even I'd envisaged it as. And the same relationship between strategists and creatives, where you are trying to work together to bring an idea to life. Often your idea is augmented and maybe even bigger and more powerful by the creative brains of our creative partners. And so I think there's other similarities to that there.
And now I always expect it. I want it. We develop a strategy, and then I want them to come back and surprise me. But I want them to surprise me in a very particular way, where I'm like, I hope they surprise me like this and not like that.
Yeah.
Or I don't know how I wanted to be surprised until I'm surprised in a way that I didn't want to be. And I'm like, that's not what I meant. But I didn't say what I meant, so I didn't get the idea across as clearly as I needed to.
Oh yeah, words are important.
It sounds like they might be. Yeah, I'm learning this. So what you and I were talking earlier about, the reason we're talking about imperfection is part of it is understanding. Well, I'm putting words in your mouth, but part of what I am interpreting is understanding and turning limitations into not necessarily an advantage, but into a tool.
Yeah, I think so. We experience limitation or challenge or struggle within all kinds of components of our lives. And, often when we talk in a strategic context, I'd say we're up against a few things like a timeline. So when do we need to create this by? Or resource, how many people do we have to work on this? Or toolkit available, do we have the right data analytics tools or ability to look in the right places? Or do we have the right information from our clients? And often we are challenged in one or more of those ways, and we're trying to find the right way to get creative around finding a good solution. And I think often when faced with a big Herculean task of answering a client brief or a problem or solving a question that's been put in front of us, the temptation is to worry about what we don't have rather than to think about what we do have and look under the car bonnet and to see what we can find under there. So, places or ways that we can do that. Looking back at old or different kinds of projects that we did to see what tools we use there and what we can learn from it. Talking to peers or other people in our networks, whether that's other people who might use the product we're working on or have experience with a brand we're creating a brand strategy for, or co-workers who've worked on similar projects, and ask them, what is it that they've used when they're in a pinch, and how can we make use of that, and how can we make it helpful to us? And then when it's with a timeline, I always try to think of it as, what is the most important question that we have to answer for our clients right now? And what is going to actually get us to the best answer that we can get to within that timeline or within the context of this particular ask. And by honing in on those things, it makes it sound easier than it is maybe, but I think by honing in on those things and trying to avoid the other noise that says that we haven't done enough or we haven't questioned enough, you can sometimes find yourself being more single-minded. And I think this is all easier said than done. We're toiling away and we're questioning over and over again, have we pushed this far enough? And have we done enough work to actually make this valuable? Whereas, getting comfortable with the imperfection and practicing other ways in our lives of feeling that we're in the mess and feeling that we are okay with things that aren't completely done or finished or right is a really good way of kind of harnessing that skill and getting better at it, because there's never going to be one right answer or one right way of doing everything.
Right. We have to move forward with something that we've gotten as far as we can and the information that got us there, so that the next group of people can look at the idea and the information that we have to support it and say, oh, okay, I see where you were going. And I agree. I disagree. I can build on it. I'm not sure I get it yet. Is that
right? Exactly. Yeah.
But it sounds like you nourish this idea in your life, this idea of the imperfection through, like, you play into this pretty heavily outside of the office.
Yeah, I think it's something that's happened almost haphazardly over the years, and that I do try and nourish. And it's part desire for self-improvement. It's come from a desire for self-improvement and to understand myself better and to know how I work and how I think and how I go about my life in more depth and richness. And it's also become part of a practice that cultivates an ability to be okay with imperfection and not get so anxious about things not being perfect, whether that's a project process or a deliverable or, something else that I've done in my life. I think it started with the first true maybe practice that I took up in my adult years. And I wish that I'd known more of this when I was younger and practicing away on the piano and the flute and all the other things I did. But when I was in China, I started doing a lot of yoga. And, the way that you talk about yoga is as a yoga practice. It's not something which is ever perfect. And the more you practice yoga, the more you learn that to try and be perfect is to fly in the face of what the practice is about, which is about being where your mind and your body are in that moment. And so the more I embraced that, the more I found more equanimity in my own self, an ability to accept myself and how I was minute to minute, day to day, where I was, rather than expecting myself to show up differently or to be different. And also, I think you learn to forgive yourself when you are less than perfect in the way that you show up in your life, because you're becoming more used to this kind of this relationship with yourself and your body and your mind. And it's shifting all the time. It's shifting every time you get on your mat and you feel that shift. And then you can't do the things yesterday that you did tomorrow, or vice versa. And so it teaches you patience with yourself, but it also teaches you that to be in the practice and in the work is much more valuable than to always be striving for a particular goal.
Oh, So this is why I've never done yoga. But this is why I didn't mean this is why I haven't done yoga. I have never done yoga, but this is that rationale you just presented is why I never did things like golf. Like, I don't want to be the guy in my 40s that's learning to do that with people that already are pretty good at it, and kind of always being the one that's off. But it takes a certain kind of comfort to say, I'm going to be off, and tomorrow maybe I'll do better, or maybe I won't. But what thing will I take away from this that makes, the experience more enjoyable, or that sticks in my brain in a certain way? That sounds like you're getting.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. But I think yoga is actually a really good example, because you often talk to people about it and they say, well, I can't do yoga, I'm not flexible. And it's such a cliche, and I try to not really go there, because I feel like it's such a cliche to say, no, it's not about being flexible. It's about being where you are, and then over time, maybe flexibility will happen. But it's challenging, especially as adults, to go into something where we don't have full control over what's going to happen. We don't know how to get to the outcome that we want to get to. And to say, I'm going to enter into this with a mindset of playfulness or exploration or kindness to myself, right? Which is something that I learned about. I don't always achieve it, but it's something I've learned a lot about through a mindfulness practice and course that I did. And that's another area that I've explored in. But it takes a lot of courage to go there. And in adulthood, I think we feel often like we have to have all the answers, in our work and in our day-to-day as managers of other people, as people who have bosses. It's quite anxiety provoking to feel like you don't. And it can just take a moment sometimes where you can reflect or recall other moments or other areas of your life where you're able to feel like it's okay. I don't need to have all the answers myself, because this is where I am right now, and I can ask for help, or I can work on this, or it's a skill I need to develop. And that can come from some of these other areas where you start to develop a more playful or explorative mindset.
Are you still taking on hobbies and things to test this?
Yeah, so there's been a number of different hobbies that I've evolved through over the years, and I think one of the things that I've definitely learned about myself is that I'm actually quite happy having multiple hobbies that I'll explore and not always getting to mastery in any one of them. Although there are a couple, I guess, that I like to think of as being my key ones. But I've skied a lot over the last almost 20 years, and that's one where it's probably my favorite thing to do in the world because of the feeling of freedom. And I get a lot of joy from a sense of some mastery of it. But that's taken a lot of hours of practice and input, and also the feeling of building on different types of learning in order to get there. So skiing is one where I love to learn new skills. I love to take lessons still sometimes. I love to explore new terrain. But I'm probably more of a master of it than some of my other ones. So I don't have a piano in New York, and or I have my flute. I have a piano, and so I took up the ukulele because I wanted to be able to sing and play. And that was a really interesting experience for me, because I've never played a string instrument of any sort or played a guitar.
It's a lot different set of muscle memory.
Very different to a piano, even the way that you think about chords or chord structure is totally different, the way that you're using your fingers. So I got this ukulele as a gift from my mom, and it was great. I could learn. What I found was interesting. I could very quickly learn to play a few tunes, and going from 0 to 10 or 10 to 100 was much harder. So my little brother actually is quite a talented guitarist and plays multiple other instruments, and he kept saying to me, "No, you have to practice slowly. You have to practice slowly and rhythmically. Take the strumming a lot slower. Don't rush at it." All these things that we used to be told when we were children playing instruments. And I was like, "Oh, you're right."
You don't want to hear it now. Yeah, now you're like, "Shut up."
Yeah, I don't want to hear it.
But that's what we expect, though, right? We expect, even if I translate that to a new software tool or a new research platform that we get access to, we expect to be able to sit down and find what we want right away, versus, I'm going to play. I'm just going to set up a fake search and just mess around with it for 3 months and just see what I figure out how to do. And that's usually when you go, look at this. I can do this. I can create this kind of graphic. Versus if you log in for the first time and have a deliverable, you have a report that's due, then you're in deep trouble.
You're in deep trouble. And also, that I totally relate to that feeling. And I think it's something that over time I've confronted a bit, which is the expectation of being able to do things easily, because perhaps that's what happened when we were younger, when we were kids, we picked things up easily. And the truth is, especially as strategists, often you are confronted with, whether it's new tools, methodologies, new questions you're having to ask in research and finding the right way of doing that. you'll look at something and say, I have absolutely no idea how to wade through this right now or approach it.
Right.
And it takes a lot of, that's courage again, right? The more courageous thing to do is to step back and admit that you don't know exactly how to do it right now, and then to explore, okay, so what do I know? What do I not know? Who do I need to ask? And how can I be really thoughtful about this? And I think that's definitely an evolution that I've experienced and gone through over time in multiple different jobs. I went to Fitch from Brand Union, which became Super Union, and at Fitch I was brought on to be a brand strategist who could pull through that thinking into retail strategy, retail and innovation and experience. And I'd never worked on I'd never done a project where we were actually doing the strategy to create and bring to life a store before. And it's a really different type of strategy that you're doing. The way that you're right, you have to be much less esoteric in some ways and much more tangible, because the way that 3D designers need to work is they need to latch on to particular kinds of language and concept that is very specific in some ways, right? You're actually talking through an experience that someone might have in a space. And so you're not being esoteric in the way that you could start to be in a territory that you were putting out there to discuss with someone. And I certainly had to be very humble about learning how to do that and asking a lot of questions from the designers of what do you actually need, and what will actually make this work for you when we're using language in different ways, and how can we actually work together to make this what it needs to be.
Yeah, sometimes the question, what would be valuable here, is almost never what would be valuable the time before. Sometimes that's a very useful question. What's the most valuable piece of information I could track down in this situation that I'm in right at this moment? So a new challenge like that. It's nice to have people you can ask what would make their job easier, but I suspect they half knew and they half didn't know. It's like they thought they had an idea what would be useful, but they didn't know 100% all the way. So they helped get you there, but not prescriptively.
Right. Yeah. And I mean that's the beauty of a good collaboration, right? That you're getting each other there in different ways by trying to fill the gaps where the other one's moving to, and then you're coming to meet them, right? That's definitely how I've experienced some of the best partnerships that I've had in work situations.
It's the same with research when we partner with those people that are experts in quant. They have a totally different mindset and they know how to get to the thing you want, but they've oftentimes struggle with the concept that leads to the question, to the answer. You have to really walk them through, like, I need quant to prove this, but this is the general theory I'm trying to solve for. And that first step is the hard one for them. And then once they have that, it's all dominoes.
Right. Yeah. But once they know what you're trying to actually find, they're able to slot all the different pieces together.
Yeah. Then it just becomes like they're programming that geometric art that you talked about earlier.
Right.
What new hobbies do you have on the horizon?
So the hobby I've been doing most recently, which I think was the one I started to tell you about when we first started chatting, was ceramics.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The ceramics is a great hobby for anyone who wants to explore this idea of imperfectionism and embracing it in your life. And it's actually came up in conversation with another brand strategist that I know, who is a very, I think, pretty talented ceramicist and very committed. And I've done quite a bit of ceramics as a teen, but mainly hand building. And I found out recently from my teacher in New York, she was like, yeah, all this wedging stuff, you don't really need to do that. I don't know why she was making you wedge for an hour every week. And I was like, oh, we were wayward, 14, 15-year-old girls at an all-girls school. So she's probably just trying to
kill time.
Instill some discipline. When I was 15, I did a ton of hand building, and then really enjoyed it. And for a long time had this kind of yearning to go back to it, and then found out about the class and started in the fall. And I've been learning how to throw on the wheel. And that is truly confronting, because you see all these beautiful ceramics, and it's a very Instagram thing these days. These people having beautiful ceramics in their home and lovely plates and vases and stuff.
Right.
And so there's sort of that expectation versus reality. And the first time you get on the wheel, the likelihood is that what you'll do is, not be able to center your clay, and you'll squish it to pieces, and it will just be, a mess. And I found a lot of pleasure through exploring this feeling of just playing, knowing that I wasn't going to be perfect. They say that you have to throw about 50 to 100 objects before you would actually get an evenness through all the sides of what you're making. So if it's a vase, where you would actually have even contours.
Right.
And actually, they also say that once you've thrown that many, what you really need to do is just start cutting everything in half to see how even it is. So imperfection is baked into the process of learning to be a good potter. And I found myself, as a strategist, we are a lot of the time, we're spending a lot of time thinking and with ideas and concepts and analysis, and we're trying to make sense of maybe multiple different conflicting elements of a tricky problem. And so going to do ceramics on a Wednesday night for 3 hours has become somewhat of a refuge where I could go and be absolutely exhausted, but find myself ignited by using this different side of my brain, where it's all about feel and touch. And again, you can't rush it. You have to be very you have to really feel into the clay and not rush the process and not push too hard, because then you're going to, push the side in. And also be then patient with all the different elements of the process. So from throwing it and getting comfortable with that and getting the right shape that you desire, and then firing it and then glazing it. And glazing it's a whole other level of challenge.
It can go totally sideways.
So sideways. Because you can't see when you're glazing, you can't actually see what you're painting on.
Right.
So just kind of throwing it out there, and again, learning from each try that you have.
You're referencing time, and your 3 hours of time, and the amount of at bats it takes to improve. And I wonder, in agency world, because we think about time a lot differently, we think of time as a constraint versus a luxury almost always. Has that changed how you approach time management at work? And I say at work, but I know work spans all kinds of boundaries.
Yeah, as I've grown and learned about myself over the years, I definitely started to see that I would find time management challenging if I didn't give myself time constraints around what I needed to try and achieve. And everyone's different on this. Some people want to do the full get things done, be super rigorous and meticulous of what's coming into my inbox and what's my next action. And I've tried that, and I found that it was quite constraining and didn't really work with the way that my brain likes to work. But on the other hand, if I start my day with an idea of, so today will be a good day if I've done these 5 things and started these 2 tasks, that enters me into this kind of, it puts me in a situation of being in kind communion with what's on my plate and making it feel like a great achievement if I get there, rather than, oh my gosh, I'm really burdened by time. And I think the other thing about time in agency world is that we often think about a deliverable rather than the problem that we're trying to solve. And we think, oh my gosh, well, if I have a presentation next week, I have to start making a deck, and I have to start making these slides.
Yes.
I have to start putting these titles on a slide, rather than actually taking the time to sit back and say, let me noodle around with these different thoughts and ideas and actually work on answering the question and the problem that we need to solve. And that's actually something that my boss at Co, Neil, is really big on. And I've really enjoyed that he is a champion of that, because I think it's already making me think even more differently about what time means in an agency setting and in our jobs, where we're always trying to do the most with what we've got, often under the pressure of having multiple meetings in a day and trying to find the pockets of time where we can actually do work.
Yeah, that's the quiet time to focus.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to let you get back to your day, which is hopefully coming to an end. When you practice scales, Are you the kind of person that plays scales at an even pace repeatedly, or do you hasten as you go and get faster and faster until you break the scale?
Well, I'm going to be honest. I haven't played a scale in a long time. I probably should have. When I was younger, I was probably a bit of the latter, that I wouldn't like to keep a pace, and I probably fought with my mom about practicing scales. Yeah, but I did learn. I think as I got older, I went to university, and I had a pretty strict Russian piano teacher, and she did drill me on scales and exercises and things, and made me be very meticulous about it. And it was really helpful.
There was a metronome involved if she was Russian, I'm sure.
Yeah, there was a metronome involved. And there was other techniques as well, like when you practiced a piece, you had to, the thing is, like, imagine you're going through a deck, right? And you're reviewing the deck, and you always go from the front, and it's a long deck. And so you're always reviewing the front of the deck, and you're never getting to the back of the deck, or everyone's tired by the time you get to the back. It's the same with music. So if you're learning something, if you always start from the beginning, you're not giving attention to the back. So I'd have to practice it the last bar, then the last 2 bars, then the last 3, then the last 4, all the way to the front.
Yeah, but then you've mastered everything at the back. That's awesome.
Yeah, so you do something backwards and you reap the rewards.
That's fantastic. Well, Jessica, this was great time, well spent. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to speak to you.
Wait, don't stop listening. The show's not over. If you liked what you just heard, or you've liked any of the episodes of The Strategy Inside Everything, do me a favor. I really appreciate it. Leave a review wherever you listen to the show, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever. Please leave us a rating and a review. Please, if you can, share this episode or another episode with a friend. Let them know what you liked about it. That helps us quite a bit. If you have ideas for guests, for topics, follow up on episodes you've heard, you can tweet at us at @apierno, that's me, or at strategy_inside, that's the show. Either way, I promise I will respond to you and get back to you right away. And listen, running this show is a labor of love. I really do it just because I enjoy the conversations, but it does cost money. So web hosting costs money, microphones cost money, my kids' haircuts cost money. If you wouldn't mind, look at our Patreon. It's Patreon, Adam Pierno there, and you could help us out quite a bit. For more information about all the guests we've had, anything you want to know about the podcast, my 2 books, Underthink It and Specific, or ways to engage with me as a strategy consultant or as a speaker at your next event, please go to Headliner.app and you'll find all the information you want. And if you can't, just send me a note. Thanks a lot.